Okay, I think that's enough time for everyone to log in here. So welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the Moss Bay Neighborhood Spring Meeting. We have a pretty rich and informative agenda this evening, and before we get to it, I just have a couple of administrative points. Can everybody, let's see, mute their microphones? Perfect. Here we go. So first off, this meeting is recorded and it's going to be available tomorrow, most likely on our Facebook page and at the mossbay.org website. So once again, let's mute our microphones unless we're speaking. We try to save questions for the end of each presentation. To ask a question, you can either raise your hand, unmute, or you can just type it in the chat and I can read it out so it could be recorded. All right. So with that, we get to our first item on the agenda is the Forum of the Future of Park Lane. We have B, who's going to take us through the format. B, are you there?
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hey there. Sorry. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It's great to see tonight's attendance. So this is a proposal that the City Council is considering, that the City of Kirkland is considering. And there's many points of view about the opening of Park Lane to pedestrian access or the closure to traffic. And lots of perspectives brings lots of interest. And we're really glad to see you all tonight. We thought what we'd do, because our way of presenting things as a neighborhood association is to present all points of view and then allow our constituents to make up their own mind and ask their own questions, and then go to city council or city officials or others in the community and express their points of view. So with that in mind, we're going to start out tonight with a presentation with some background information from the City of Kirkland, none other than our incredible James Lopez, Deputy City Manager for the City of Kirkland. He's going to frame things and just give you the facts. And then we have two presenters with different, maybe even some overlapping points of view. And at random today, Alex chose to start with Kirkland Greenways following Jim Lopez, and then the Downtown Kirkland Alliance. So Kirkland Greenways, our presenter is going to be Brad Weed. And for the Downtown Kirkland Alliance, Andrea Christensen. And with that, again, thank you all for being here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim Lopez.
Thank you so much, B, and thank you, Alex. And it's wonderful to see you all tonight. I am borrowing a deck, a PowerPoint from our staff. So forgive me. To give my presentation tonight. This was a presentation that was given in January, I think in front of the Transportation Commission. So the Neighborhood Association asked me to present tonight really and be here to answer questions about what the city is actually doing, what is the consultant's project, kind of very factual, descriptive presentation. And I appreciate that, and I certainly welcome the opportunity to do that. There is a website devoted to this topic, which I defer all of you to. We really tried to answer all questions on that one place, one-stop shop. So that is kind of a follow-up item. Alex, I think I can share my screen now. Is that right?
Yep, you should be able to.
Great, let's see. And so for tonight, can you all see that? No. Is that working?
Yep.
Boom. All right, that's a good sign. We've got shared screen success. So for tonight, I'm going to go through this, these slides and answer questions, and then I think Martha Chaudhry's on the line too. She can help answer questions as well. And then please follow up with city staff directly or to that website should you have extra questions. So with that, I'll jump right into the future of Park Lane. Again, thank you very much to Victoria for allowing me to use her deck. So a very brief history, and I think the history is outlined pretty well on the landing page, going back to this flexible street concept in 2008. The street was actually renovated in 2015 with this festival street design. 2019, we did a pilot called Summer Sundays. I think that was just a Sunday closure. 2020, 2021, the city moved to evenings on Park Lane, which is just the west side of Park Lane where we closed it during the evenings. I think those 2 years are differentiated by one of the first COVID year having parklets also as part of the street closure. So there's different elements or levels to our experience, different elements to the two experiences in 2020 and 2021. 2022, we adopted the active transportation plan, which commits to a continued evaluation of the Park Lane closure to vehicles. And in August, the council authorized a consultant study. In October of last year, the 2-year extension on evenings in Parks Lane expired. A lot of people asked us about that. So from October to December 22, we worked on consultant selection, and we hired a firm called MIG. I call them the notorious MIG. They're a really great group. The key point here is that as this question iterates, it just keeps coming back every year, every 2 years. The idea was, in order to make an informed decision at council, that we really had to have professional help to answer questions. And here's a visual depiction of Summer Sundays, evenings on Park Lane, and the 2 years. I'll talk a little bit about that too. But the key here is that the consultant is tasked to examine 3 options. Now, there are 4 options. The 4th option is to do nothing. But the consultant isn't tasked to evaluate the do nothing option. They're tasked to evaluate full year-round closure, summer seasonal closure from, for example, from May to October. That might be a date. And then evening only closure, similar to our experience in 2020 and 2021. And I think the sweet spot there has been 6 p.m. to around 11 p.m. But it's very important, and I really appreciate the invitation tonight to let everybody know that that is the task. It is to provide the council with answers to questions that they may have about how best to orchestrate the future of Park Lane, whether it's one of these 3 options or, of course, the 4th option to do nothing. And the key inquiry here is summarized around these 5 elements. So in order to make an informed decision about what to do at some point in the future, the consultant is structured around the idea of infrastructure, recommendations and requirements, such as shelter, seating, parklets, vehicle access control, bollards, all of those things around the cost and the need associated to do this really well. What's the infrastructure need? Particularly if you're going to do this all year round, what's the infrastructure need for pedestrians on the street? There's also an inquiry around operations, recommendations, requirements around street closure and reopening procedures, the maintenance access plan, loading zone locations, the locations of the businesses. How is all that going to work in terms of the operations of the street? And there's some complexity there. So we have a consultant looking at that for the council. The 3rd bucket is around parking mitigation strategies. A lot of this, of course, is around parking. The idea here is to look into wayfinding or other public awareness campaigns for Park Lane. What closure times are available, alternative parking lots, aesthetic or safety improvements in the library garage. How does our system of parking interact with these ideas and concepts? Is there enough parking to do something like this? And how does that work with the 3 options under consideration? So the idea is if you're going to do something on Park Lane, to be super, super thoughtful about it. Bucket number 4 here is programming. We're hearing a lot about activization, like how do you activate the street if you want to do it. There's been a lot of really great events on Park Lane, art and Wednesday markets and art markets and the like, including during the winter months. So if you're going to program it, if you're going to think about closing Park Lane beyond seasonal, how do you program it so that it is attractive to folks? And then last, public safety requirements, emergency, fire, police, vehicle access, circulation. As you can see from these 5 summary points, when the council asks about the potential of closing Park Lane, either evening, seasonal, or long-term, these issues need answers. And that's why staff has reached out to a consultant for assistance in answering those questions, or at least attempting to navigate that complexity. So what does all that mean in terms of timelines? I love me a good timeline. So here we have been engaging in stakeholder and community outreach. A lot of that has happened directly to the consultant, and that will continue through meetings like this. At the same time, the consultant now is deeply in the work of developing the answers, the pros, the cons, the items of consideration regarding all of the options that, and again, the purpose here is to give the council all the information that they would need in order to make an informed decision. As part of that, the consultant has been asked to compare closure alternatives, again, so that we have a good dynamic conversation about how this might work. And the final report, I believe, is due in June. So city staff continues to work closely with the consultant about that product. And that is really the outcome. It is a report back to council on what the consultant has learned, so we can show the community our work and how the consultant is helping the city manage the complexity of the project. So that's a brief overview of what's going on, which I think is really super important to stop and think through. It's always good to know what's happening before we talk about what happens next. And I think from my perspective, my purpose here tonight is to answer questions about that descriptive, what is happening and when is it designed to come to council. So with that, Alex, I can turn it back over to you and take questions.
I'm going to ask B, how do we want to handle this, B? Do you just want to dive straight into the other presentations and loop in Jim as questions arise, or take questions now?
I think that's a great way. So we're respectful of everyone's time. Perhaps let's go ahead and turn over the mic, so to speak, to Brad Weed for Kirkland Greenways, and then maybe have some questions. Have a brief break for questions before going on to Kirkland Business Alliance, and then depending on the questions that come up, it might be appropriate for Jim Lopez to answer, it might be appropriate for Brad Weed to answer. And then we'll do the same thing after we have the presentation from Kirkland Business Alliance to give everyone their opportunity to have their points of view shared.
Sounds good.
Doing Abby.
Okay, you're on to Brad.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Alex, thanks. B, thank you. Jim, good to hear the background. It's going to save me doing some slides here for you guys as well. I assume everybody can see the presentation. Yep. So I'm here representing Kirkland Greenways. So we advocate for safe and active transportation choices for people of all ages and abilities. And Park Lane, actually all of downtown, has been on our radar for a variety of different projects, including some that Jim mentioned earlier. And so now that Park Lane's under investigation, we're leaning in as well. And we call it evenings on Park Lane, but we like to talk about it as people on Park Lane. Like our primary objective here, I think, for everybody involved is just to get more people downtown and on Park Lane. So I was going to give a little bit of a review, but Jim already did that, so I don't need to go through that. We got involved when we learned that MIG was selected, and this was triggered actually by an agenda item topic in January 9th. And we learned that a downtown alliance had been formed. Sheila's here tonight, and Sheila and I have been in touch for the last month or so, which has been really great. And the city then confirmed that MIG was indeed selected. We heard their stakeholders sessions being scheduled, but we weren't invited as stakeholders. We think advocacy groups of all shapes and sizes should be considered stakeholders. And so we reached out to the city. Jim allowed us to contribute, and together with Kirkland Outside the Walls and Livable Kirkland, we did some recruiting to get people signed up for the listening sessions. We also invited commissioners to show up and voice their opinions as well. We think there are stakeholders that need to be included in these sessions. And so those sessions, as Jim noted, have taken place, and now they're trying to figure out what to do with feedback. So I just thought I would step through a little bit on how we got here to begin with, and just remind people that Kirkland has gone through radical changes throughout its history. And the folks that would have lived downtown Kirkland during this time would not recognize anything about Kirkland. It was, a shipbuilding town at that time. And then as soon as the ferry showed up, so did cars. And it wasn't long before cars were lined up along the road on the way to the ferry. And Kirkland was, it was the retail hub for the East Side in these days. People would drive their cars from all over the East Side, including Bellevue, to do their shopping. And it was so busy that, even the intersection right now where Starbucks is, that was once a gas station, but Park Lane, or as it was called then, Commercial Street, actually had its own traffic light signal. And so it wasn't long before Kirkland started to take shape as we would recognize it today. And that continued to change over time. Even though it was developed, Kirkland back then was still a very different city. It was a bedroom community accessed through ferries and largely agricultural. But that changed over time, and Park Lane, or what was then called Commercial Street, was actually a two-way street with parking on each side. And it featured at the end of it a JCPenney, which was the primary attraction for East Side shoppers. And on either side of JCPenney were a collection of retail shops. At the time, the city convened a vision committee for what to do with Park Lane. It historically had suffered because there was a creek that used to run through what's today Park Lane. The road was constantly under construction and repair. The trees often were rotting. And so they convened this committee to figure out what they wanted to do with it. And that committee envisioned Park Lane as a pedestrian-only specialty retail environment. And some even called for the creek to be reinstated. And this is all found in research that Matthew Macaulay has uncovered as part of his History of Kirkland work. He's written a book about it and writes a lot of articles about it as well. And so then in 2015, after decades of dealing with a troubled Park Lane, the city decided to remake Park Lane as we know it today. And so I thought I'd share this video that kind of explains what the city was after with Park Lane and what we got.
I love Park Lane. Love that it invites a welcome atmosphere to, street canvas, get out, talk to the community, promote art, promote politics, any community organizing that might be going on, or just, being friends.
And these little micro wetlands are amazing.
Says the microbiologist.
I mean, how could you not notice the little micro wetlands? They're kind of clumping here and there. They're spacious. They don't get in the way, but they're gorgeous. I really want to see what they look like when it starts to rain, kind of getting that filtration process going on.
The street is actually doing what they wanted it to do, where it is car and people friendly.
I like that it is pedestrian focused. It definitely lowers the amount of cars that are here, so there's just more people walking around and it's a lot more involvement between businesses and the people on the streets.
It increased our business exponentially. We'll have people come in and we'll tell them it's going to be 30 to 45 minutes potentially for an outside table, and they're like, yeah, no problem, we'll wait. And it's like, are you crazy? Like,
the new trees that are planted, they're blossoming, they're beautiful. The brickwork, it's intricate and it's interesting. The color variation, I think, is a nice touch.
Yeah, so like if you were coming from maybe like somewhere down there and there was no seating, you could just come here and sit wherever you want.
I like the fact that it's all well maintained and it's even, so if I was in a wheelchair, I could get around no problem. If I'm on a bike or something like this, it's very safe and easy to get around, and it's obvious to tell where the separation is between people and vehicles. And there's a little bit of crossover, but it's okay, because people respect the space.
So that's where we are today. And I thought I'd jump to 2019 when the city of Kirkland applied to Puget Sound Regional Council to have downtown designated an urban growth center. So urban centers are regionally designated places that contain a mix of uses and activities and are connected by efficient transportation and are well suited to accommodate future growth. And this is all to say that change is definitely coming to downtown Kirkland. The city actually scrambled to get this designation in place in 2019 before Puget Sound Regional Council closed the window to actually get designations. And it's been approved by the Growth Management Planning Council. They're still waiting for approval from the Puget Sound Regional Council, but there was an updated presentation done on March 2nd by Adam Weinstein, and everyone's expecting the Puget Sound Regional Council to have a formal declaration. The original map for this greater downtown boundary area extended just up into what we now would call the 85th Area Station Area Plan. But the more recent presentation by Adam on March 2nd actually extended that a little bit further than what they originally had planned, and now seems to encompass the entirety of the 85th Area Station Area Plan, which offers a greater downtown boundary area. And Adam is very clear that he expects that to yield around 6,700 additional residents, 17,000 jobs. Population is expected to double by 2035, and jobs to increase by another 9,000. So growth is coming to downtown, and it's going to come down to a question of how do we adjust to that change. Now, you guys, the Moss Bay Neighborhood Association, as part of your plan update in 2021, accounted for a lot of this change. And indeed, a lot of the language that you used in the policies that were determined reflect the kind of downtown that you want to have and that you would like to see the city execute on, which includes a lot of the elements that we Kirkland Greenways respect and admire and advocate for around the city. Not only are you calling for opportunities of residential and mixed use development, but you're encouraging a vibrant, walkable community. And as part of your land use designations in the plan, you focus in large part to some of the retail areas that are located west of 3rd Street. So this would be west of the transit center. And I'll talk more about the promenade that connects some of these elements as well. And both the neighborhood association and the city recognize that the nature of retail downtown needs to change from what it is today. And if it doesn't, then it lessens the opportunities and reasons for Kirkland residents, employees, and tourists to frequent the downtown. So you and the city are expecting downtown to change. And I won't go through each of these policies item by item. It was more to highlight, again, some of the language that we think is consistent with a more pedestrian-oriented Park Lane and downtown area. Less reliance on personal automobiles, make it easier for people to own and park downtown. This, I think, policy 14 is a biggie, opportunities to enhance communication. I think we could all do a better job of including the business owners and property owners on Park Lane, as well as you all as members of the Moss Bay neighborhood, to come together and envision the kind of Park Lane that you would like to see together. I'm confident everybody would show up finding common ground to do that. And it's good to see you call it out as part of the neighborhood plan. And in terms of transportation, here too, there's a lot of language that highlights pedestrian routes that should have higher priority. There should be pedestrian amenities and routes to continue to improve, and that they should be given higher priority. And modifications to the network or any kind of traffic pattern should not be allowed to disrupt downtown pedestrian activity and circulation. So there's a lot of emphasis on walking and biking and transit as part of the plan. That extends into these policies. And we really like this idea of pilot projects. So consider sidewalk widening pilot projects. We think Park Lane is an opportunity to pilot programs like that. And I think I also call out here number 27, which is to keep in mind that Park Lane is certainly the best in the summer times, but it could be great all year round if there's ways that we could have some areas covered so that we could activate that space even in the wintertime. And then you even have a policy, 32, which targets Park Lane in particular, expand and iterate pilot programs to enhance pedestrian-only access along Park Lane. So I invite everybody here to just imagine what the possibilities could be. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about this one section of Park Lane, but I think it's important that we remember this summer, the construction of the Lake Street Scramble, pedestrian scramble, is going to kick off in July. And this is going to change the nature of downtown dramatically already by the end of the summer. The PROS plan, and I think some of you probably on this call were part of the PFAC, the PROS plan calls for a master plan for Peter Kirk Park and Lee Johnson Field. That most likely is going to call for some rectangular recreation facilities, soccer fields, and other amenities. And so that whole area, we should expect to be redeveloped and change as well, and will probably become more of a center point for downtown Kirkland than it is already today. And that leads me to the Park Walk Promenade, which features, again, in your neighborhood plan. It also features in the proposals to the Puget Sound Regional Council. the city has a vision for getting people from the waterfront down Park Lane, through Peter Kirk Park, to Kirkland Urban, and all the way up to the CKC, and maybe even to the 85th station area plan. And so as we think about what Park Lane could be, I think it's important that we keep in mind the way it will be utilized in the near future and definitely the distant future is likely to be very different than what it is today. Kirkland Greenways did a little bit of research just to see how other cities maybe have handled these kind of transitions. And we were drawn to this project in Jersey City, which did a very similar project. This too is connected next to transit, just like Park Lane is. And the city and the mayor have been really happy with the results. And it's in large part because the city has remained engaged and continue to invest in Jersey City and this pedestrian plaza to ensure its success. And they're not just relying on community members and business owners to try to pull that off, but they're actually putting money behind it. Another one to call out, we think, is University Village, because this too is an attractive destination for people all year round. And that's in large part because it's taken care of very well. Yes, it's a private mall, which helps them to control their own budget in some ways. But we think what makes it attractive is that it's well maintained, it's well designed, and it features a lot of covered areas so that even if it's raining, people can feel comfortable there. And so what Kirkland Greenways calls for is a three-pronged approach, which is to start by determining some predictable hours that we can pedestrianize the space. We throw out a couple examples here that are consistent with what we've already experienced with evenings on Park Lane, but we mostly call for a full throttle activation of Park Lane and downtown Kirkland. And we want to get businesses and residents involved in what this activation looks like. But we believe the city should have somebody in charge of an activation calendar that goes year round, and that they need to work with business owners, property owners, and residents on what those events are. The more I've engaged the Downtown Alliance, the more I've learned that it's not just about more people. A lot of the events that Kirkland does have downtown today indeed attract a lot of people, but they're not the kind of people, or they're not occurring at the time of day that really benefit retail. And large masses of people over a short period of time can also do a lot of damage. And so I think it's important that when the city figures out an activation calendar, that they do it together with everybody who cares the most about this area. And then we think that the city should do as other cities have done. If the city would like to have this area, downtown Kirkland, and even the greater downtown area, be a world-class destination, they need to invest in making it so. And so that involves supporting retailers to adjust to a new normal in downtown Kirkland. As population increases and densities increase, they need to adjust and react accordingly. And they should do that with the assistance of the city. But you guys know that space the best, and so I'm looking forward to hear what other ideas you might have for how downtown could get activated, and including Park Lane.
I have a question. This is Scott Becker.
Hey, Scott.
How are you?
Good.
I appreciate you putting this on. The question that I have, and one thing that I heard that I think we should really pay attention to, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I understand that there was a survey given to all the property owners and the retail businesses, that there wasn't very many, or there were none of them were in favor of closing Park Lane on a permanent basis. I was around when they first started opening up the street, closing the street in the summers to to the restaurants and walking, and closing it to cars. And then they kind of moved it to, well, cars are still allowed, but we're going to do bump outs with the restaurants and with the retail stores that want to put stuff out on the sidewalk, I guess at certain times. Can you tell me what else was on that survey, and if that's actually true, that there were no property owners and businesses that were in favor of closing Park Lane permanently?
Yeah, so I was pulling numbers from the city website and I don't know, Jim might know how to access the results of the survey, or he may recall some of the specifics.
Just in general, that doesn't have to be exact, but I'm just kind of curious how that went, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think there was, and I think Martha's on the line too. You could help me, but I think we have everything on our website that has past data. We did a non-statistically significant survey generally and presented that to council. I think there was a local survey sent around, Martha, if you could help me out here.
Yes. The original survey, the non-statistical survey, was, sort of like voluntary responses. And I mean, I hate to pull numbers out of my memory, but my recall was about 70 to 75% of the population that responded to that survey was in favor of looking at the closure of Park Lane.
But I think the local business survey was, maybe it was a paper survey or somebody walked around, and I think it is correct that most, if not all, the businesses were not for it. And I don't want to speculate either. We certainly can look into that.
Yeah, I think that that's accurate. There were concessions for considering evening closure, but I think it's generally true that the businesses trend not to want to look at vehicle closure on Park Lane. I think that that's a fair statement, but I wouldn't want to put any numbers to it without double checking.
Can we please move back to the presentations? Ms. Nahan, the agreement was that each group would have an opportunity to present. And this is now turning into a Q&A, which was not what was agreed to at the beginning, please.
Right. We were going to just have brief questions after each one, and the same thing will happen after you do your presentation. So if we're ready for Andrea, that's certainly fine. And I wasn't aware of any agreement to do something else.
I think that's exactly what was said at the beginning.
I'm ready whenever, but if we want to finish, I'm sorry, your name's not on your title. Whoever had asked a question, finish up that question.
Andrea, it would be a pleasure to have you make your presentation, and thank you for being here.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well, and then change in my little Zoom so I can see all of you all. I think it's a little bit of a challenge for us to go third. There's some great information shared. I think we have a little bit different context. And so that's really what I want to try to convey here, is the context for which the property owners and the business owners have for this. So this presentation is one we gave to MIG, so about a month or two ago now. So that's kind of the context of this presentation. And then I'll try to ad lib a little bit of information. There's lots of things that came up, obviously, in the city's presentation and in Brad's presentation. That's just a different context for what we see as our viewpoint. So this presentation, again, I should start with, my name is Andrea Christensen. So I'm representing the Downtown Alliance. Sheila is online here as well today. So just so you know who we are. So what I want to try to cover today is who the Downtown Kirkland Alliance is. I know not everyone is super familiar with this group because we're a newer group. I'll kind of go through some supplementary reading that we put together for MIG, because there's been an incredible amount of research that especially Sheila has done around the context of all of this. So I don't have a fancy timeline, or actually I do have a fancy timeline, but it's like 12 pages long. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to share that with you. Some context around the map, some key issues as we see it as the business and property owners, some additional research, stakeholder groups, current state of Park Lane, which I think is really important to talk about, especially the video, which was beautiful. But the video is, I understand it is from like 2017, and the current state of Park Lane is not what that video shows. So again, context to what's happening. Some risks and impacts we see as the business and property owners, and our recommendations and next steps. So the Downtown Kirkland Alliance, or we call ourselves the Downtown Kirkland Alliance, is a property and business owners alliance. And right now this really specifically represents Park Lane. And we're a volunteer organization that promotes the success of small businesses through advocacy, support, and education on issues that affect property rights. So our context is very, very focused on the property and business owners, who are largely legacy business owners, minority and women owned. So there's, again, context around the people that are represented on Park Lane, and how we're being engaged in this process. So there's been an incredible amount of, it's a very popular little street, Park Lane, an incredible amount of history and data around this 500 feet of lane. And we've got a lot of this extra data that obviously I won't have time to go through today just for time constraints, but a really detailed timeline of the history events that all came from public disclosure requests on the city's website. So again, providing that context. A lot of information about the special events and festival street, which I don't know if everyone is super familiar with. Maybe you are, but there's an existing city process around special events and using festival streets. And closures of park lanes sometimes have followed that process, sometimes have not followed that process, but there's existing processes out there. And so some of this documentation can really help you understand what's out there today, and how that would affect this change as well. There's a whole report about delayed maintenance, which you'll see when we get to the current state photos. There was a lot of beautiful work that was done in 2017, the pavers and the planters, but if you've been down to Park Lane recently, it doesn't look like that anymore. And there's not a lot of, or there's a lot of who's on first around who's responsible for that upkeep. So it's concerning as property and business owners that we're considering closure of a street when there's a lot that has to go onto that street to make it livable, workable, walkable, make deliveries possible. So it's great that MIG's doing that research. A lot of it is probably from Sheila. But there's a lot that has to take place before we can even really consider a closure. And just to, I should have said this at the very beginning, the business and property owners on Park Lane are not in favor of closure. There's a significant impact to each of those individual businesses with a closure. We're very much more interested in a Main Street approach, which is focused on preservation, placemaking, and economic development. And that's obviously not mutually exclusive to some of these issues being brought up, but it does seem like we're really less concerned about historical place, the buildings, the people, the community that have been there for a long time and have invested their personal dollars in their leases and their space. So when we get quite passionate about this issue because it's individuals' livelihoods and legacies that are being impacted by some of this decision making. And that's why it's really hard for us to see some of this going on. So I spent a lot more time on this slide than I meant to. So anyhow, I'm going to keep going on. So we've all showed a lot of beautiful maps. It's a lot of pressure on 500 feet. So I think some of those other maps that showed a much larger like downtown designation, that's all well and good, but we're talking about closing from here, Lake Street, I believe, to Main Street. But there's a lot of legacy businesses all over here. And you can imagine how some of these businesses might be concerned, well, if you close this street, what's that going to mean for this street and this street and this street and this street? Where there's historical buildings, there's legacy business owners. So for us, it's a lot of, there's so much of this pressure on that tiny area. And I think it's concerning that regional decisions and regional councils are making decisions for this tiny little bit of Kirkland. I haven't seen other parts of Kirkland get quite this much attention and pressure. So something to consider. So the key issues that the downtown business and property owners see is we're having a really hard understanding the why around this closure. So when I think about like change making and methodology around that, I think about there's like a issue, a sense of urgency, there's a building of a coalition, there's like a clear like stepped process for how we would go about. But it starts with that there's a real clear issue and a why we're trying to solve. And the designation of downtown as a strategic area, okay, that's downtown. We're talking about Park Lane. I'm having a hard time understanding that urgency, and I'm definitely having a challenge around building a guiding coalition, forming a strategic vision, like where are those building blocks occurring? Because the property owners don't feel a part of this process. It feels like something that's happening to them as opposed to something that's happening with them in partnership. And in the Main Street approach and in activation projects, that word's been thrown around a couple times today, there's a clear building block process with advocacy and partnerships and coalitions that happens first before we look at, or before we make a decision around a closure or we make a decision on a project. I think the business owners are feeling really left out of that. Those steps are missing for us. We're hiring a consultant, and I'm sure MIG will do a great job coming up with data, but in June, they'll present this data and the city council, as I understand it, will make a decision on closure. You know, it's a challenge. So we don't have a clear understanding of that why. We feel like we're really lacking a robust public process, an engaging process. The property owners, there's a lot of process going on, but in terms of the voices of the property owners being heard, because they're the people that work there, they're the businesses that visitors come to, and not feeling like their voices are being heard in the process. The impact of closure to the businesses is significant. So it was interesting to me that Zeeks was in that video from 2017. And Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, if it was not 17, feel free to put the date in the chat. Zeeks, if the Park Lane would closure, would have a really hard time operating. They have a bustling takeout business. Where are those cars supposed to go to pull up? Right now they have to pull up, put their flashers on. The parking lot doesn't have any temporary short-term parking spots that I'm aware of. Parking is obviously, we all agree, is a real challenge downtown. And so by taking parking spots out and closing the road, deliveries for that kind of business would be almost impossible. They don't have alleyway access. A lot of these businesses have personally guaranteed loans, thanks COVID, on their leases. How would they be compensated? So if we just need to get a better viewpoint on downtown because change is coming, what are those people going to do, right? How are we going to compensate them? Where are they going to go? Who's going to pay their loans? So these are all issues that we don't feel like are really being represented. And hopefully Meg will show all this data and it will be a very compelling vision towards no. At least, obviously, I hope that we make that clear. The property owners vote no. So impact of closure. And then lastly, around the current state of the roadway, as we'll see in the slides next, Park Lane is not as cute as it used to be. Getting it back to the level of service of 2017, which was beautiful, there wasn't recurring funding that I'm aware of that has kept it up to that level of service. So those beautiful rain gardens don't look like that anymore. The garbage is a real problem. There's a lot of work that has to be done to bring it back to 2017 level of service, let alone new things moving forward. So this is a very active group. So they have met, this is the Downtown Property Alliance. We've met with multiple neighborhood associations. We've done research across the region. As I put in the chat, comparing Park Lane 500 feet to UW or to U Village or to Europe is not a fair comparison. The data is different, the context is different. So when we're looking at the data, we need to be using reasonable comparisons, and they're really kind of challenging to find. Other street closures like downtown Bothell, which is also a 1-block closure. I live in Bothell. Completely different context. There are something like, I want to say like 500 parking spots within a block of that closure. There's not 500 parking spots within a block closure of Park Lane. And also in downtown Bothell, they have access on both sides of the building. Like it's a different context for that closure. And their reasons for closure were also very different than the reasons for closure, which again are not clear. So last couple slides. This is kind of one viewpoint of the current state of the stakeholder groups. We've got Park Lane in the middle, and everyone feels like they get a vote in what happens in Park Lane. Which again, like I referenced earlier, I haven't, in my experience with organizations, seen other parts of Kirkland get the same level of everyone gets a vote. I didn't see it with Juanita. I didn't see it with Totem Lake, where all these groups were really concerned about this tiny little area. So it's just interesting to me how stakeholders are being balanced and whose voices are being heard more than others. Because obviously our viewpoint is the property owners, the people who live and work there every day, voices should be quite strongly heard. So in our viewpoint, there's a co-stewardship model, and this happens in the Main Street approach and in activation, where community members are really the ones leading in partnership with their municipality or their community, their regional group, to do projects and have building blocks that work up to bigger projects. And so for us, we'd love to see a relationship where the business and property owners can steward the Park Lane together with the city. Or like I said at the beginning, it's really feeling like this is done to us as opposed to with us. And then all of the other organizations kind of tree up into this, and that we can all advocate together for the well-being. But the people who live and work there should have a different weight, I think, than one citizen from over here or one organization for over there, or someone from another whole different area. Why is their vote a heavier weight than the property owners? That's concerning to us. Current state of Park Lane, so as I've kind of mentioned several times, this is kind of a typical state of the garbage cans. As you can see, the planters, the signage is exceedingly out of date. These solar garbage cans are a really nice idea, but like I've taken my kids down there, and especially the ones right by the gelato shop, like they're always real gross, especially in the summer when it's hot and people are, so those kind of issues, again, have to be addressed first, like building block. Let's go solve some of those problems first before we make any decisions about closures. So some risks and impacts I'd really like you to think about is what happens to property values when parking is removed? What's an impact on sales when there's no parking seasonally? What would happen, like what are the opportunity costs for this project around legal costs, expenses to business, the property owners? There's already obviously a lot of taxpayer dollars going to the consultant and to city staff time. Where else could those dollars be spent? Could we get the garbages taken out on a more regular basis? Could the green space be cleaned up? Could we use that money to bring the level of service back up? Some things to consider. What happens to the businesses if the city decides to do this? These are the core, the soul of Kirkland. People come to Kirkland, usually for Park Lane and for downtown Kirkland and the businesses that are there. So it's concerning when we hear things like, well, the businesses are just going to have to get used to a new normal. I'm sorry, but people come to Kirkland, for the feeling of Kirkland, for the waterfront, for the history. That's our viewpoint. I don't think we can just blink our eyes like and hope that they're just going to feel better about it. Like, we're not going to just feel better about our livelihoods being taken away. So our recommendations come in 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. And we think these phases should happen before any discussion of closure should occur. So phase 1 would be activating the McLeod Fountain area. So there's a lot just in that area that you could do without closing the street. There's relocation of bike storage, the garbage cans, there's improving the garden space. Like, there's a lot around there. And that's really, from our analysis, where the hub is around the ice cream shop, around Starbucks. And then once you get down into the Lounge into Park Lane more, it kind of peters out a little bit. So we think utilizing the special events ordinance for all festivals and events occurring on Park Lane. So again, an existing process for special events, for closures, for markets. There's an existing process today. We should be utilizing it. We have an opportunity to participate with the University of Washington to really get some concrete data. And I appreciate that Martha and the staff we didn't quote any numbers, because I think that's a challenge right now, is we're sometimes looking at different data. Our analysis of the businesses, from walking to each of those businesses, and some of the businesses are on the call today, is that they are not in favor of a closure. But there's data out there from not long ago or from some time ago that says some are in favor. In the video, they said Park Lane closure was great, but I'm not sure that's an accurate statement. And so we need to have very clear data that accurately represents the viewpoints of the businesses and the property owners. And the last few things, the delayed maintenance, like I've mentioned before. So again, 2017 was beautiful. It's not 2017 anymore, especially after COVID, bringing it back up to that level of service, garbage collection, and then evaluation of this phase. And then long-term, this would be as phase 2, forgot to retitle this slide, identify City of Kirkland general fund line item for parking, or for Park Lane. So all of the things we've mentioned obviously take money, and it's unclear where that money is going to come from. So if you make a decision tomorrow to close it, if you're not in favor of, how's that going to get, how are all these wonderful things going to get paid for, both on a recurring and a non-recurring basis? Because both have to happen, because we did a non-recurring thing, it was beautiful, but it's not there anymore. So there has to be recurring funding available to support this and restore it to those 2017 levels, let alone continue on in the future. We would really like to see the Wednesday market return to Park Lane. It's another thing there's a lot of history of. It was always intended that Park Lane would be the home of the Wednesday market, but there's not sufficient infrastructure on Park Lane for the market to come. And the market was designed, as I understand it, to help on slow days, to help during the week, to be available to the community, to support the businesses, a place, a community activation in the heart of the downtown. And right now that's really not possible. And again, like the first line item, funding public works and parks staff to maintain Park Lane at an established level of service. And then we would suggest, obviously, evaluating these before we move on to any future phases. So like I said at the beginning, you can hear, I hope, the passion that we really feel, because again, the livelihoods of these businesses is a huge impact, and it feels like that gets very easily minimized under these nice ideas for the future, or these facts and data, which are valid, very valid, but it kind of negates the people who have been here, who represent Kirkland. And we really want to be represented in this process and have our viewpoints be partnered, not have something done to us. So a lot of data there. I'm sure there will be questions, and I'll do my best to answer. We can bring it back to the floor for other folks as well.
Okay. Questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry
Hey, Scott, go for it.
to occupy. Another thing that I've been thinking about and talking to people that I talk to, which are been around a long time, and I've always wondered when Park Lane would really experience a major reconstruction or a building boom. And I say that because I kind of see the future, maybe not a recent, a near future, but, in say 10 years or so, maybe not that long, but maybe Jim and Martha can talk to this point about putting residential structures 2 to 4 stories, 2 to 3 stories on top of the existing businesses, or just tearing down the businesses and the property owners go ahead and build retail and residential above that. Because a lot of people, people like living downtown, and maybe at that time, the conversation would come around again as to look at all this residential construction and future owners who want that Park Lane shut down, and perhaps there's going to be more parking. Maybe the lid that we discussed years ago at Peter Kirk Park, under the baseball field. I don't know if that's being discussed anymore, but that could be something in the future. And that's where parking would be, and people just walk across the street, and it's easy to find parking, and maybe that would be a more acceptable option. But is that something that you guys are thinking long term, or you envision long term?
I can answer that question. So with the closure, if Park Lane is closed, we do know that because those are old buildings, and part of, hopefully there is an interest in preserving a little tiny bit of what's left in downtown Kirkland. If the road is closed, it creates a fire lane issue, and there's all these things that happen, and the property owners could develop. However, they would have to use a different kind of building. They would have to build in a different manner that is significantly more expensive than the standard type of building structure. It's a more fire resistant. I don't know all the specific words for it, but it's a much more expensive way to build. So if you ask the city, am I going to lose my development potential if the road is closed, as a property owner who's invested in this, the city will say, yes, you can build, but the longer answer is that it will be significantly more expensive to build the kind of property you want. The other thing, which is extremely important, is that a property like the McLeod property that has Serena Gelato in it will be, if the road is closed, a completely useless piece of property. It will have no access. And for example, when the McLeod property had a roof problem, and the owner went to the city, and the owner was told that she needed to get on the Kirkland City Council agenda in order to get her roof fixed. And so that wasn't a very satisfying answer. So she went over to the neighboring property, and they didn't want her on their roof because of a liability issue. And then WaFed, that was in the back of her, didn't want her in. It was an inconvenience for them because they had customers. And so the property owner had to actually have the building fixed on a holiday so that the city wouldn't come and shut them down. So you've got properties being rendered absolutely inaccessible. The other thing is there's a lot of people that are upstairs that are forgotten on top of where the Ivy Gift and Home is, and they only have one way in and one way out, and they are carrying large, heavy materials in and out of there. And they also have a lot of people that get dropped off for services. And so that's gone. And those folks up there, there's one individual up there that reported at the MIG interview that she alone is sitting on a $700,000 lease that is personally guaranteed. And I did a little bit more research into that and found that between $700,000 and $1 million leases is what each one of those business owners is sitting on, that now, because of COVID and because of everybody trying to run out on leases, if the road closes and they can't make their rent and they go out of business, they are bankrupt. And so, as Andrea said, our issue is it's not, the property owners are not Luddites. They are not unwilling to change. It's not that they're not willing to do something different. Their issue is that the road there hasn't been any investment in this road since the day it reopened as a Wunderdorf. And the infrastructure that was needed to put events and activities on it were never put in as part of that. That road was fixed because of trying to fix the sewer lines. And then it just was an afterthought. They got grant funds and made it look pretty. And if you go, I have a timeline, which anybody who would like to look at it with me, I am more than happy to go over it with you, that I developed using city council members and public disclosure, that shows that even though these property owners and business owners are very engaged and involved in what's going on in their government, there's all sorts of things and activities that occurred that they had no idea they needed to be in touch with. So this has not been transparent. And now we're sitting at looking at a potential permanent closure. And I cannot underestimate in how I tell you that these people are scared to death.
Yeah. I didn't even think about fire truck access. You know, if the streets are closed and there's tons of pedestrian traffic, and as time goes on, that will happen. There'll be times of less traffic, but boy, that's a frightening thought to think of you know, how a fire truck gets down there. Most of them can come in, you know, from the US Bank parking lot and things like that, but you know, that gets congested too with deliveries and everything for those restaurants. But I think that's probably a concern too. But the business owner thing, I agree completely with what you're talked about there. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, there's also a comment here from somebody asking about, will Park Lane East eventually face this same process? It's our belief that the city intends to close Park Lane because that's the hardest piece, and then they will just close the second piece from Main to 3rd, because that'll be a much easier piece to close. And you can go back, and I encourage everybody to go back and look that in 2019, the city already shows something called the Park Promenade that goes from urban all the way down to lake. And this is something that I only found out through public disclosure and digging very, very deep, that this is already on the books. So we're just, Downtown Kirkland Alliance our issue is really about transparency and having people understand what's really going on in their community.
What's a pedestrian scramble? I think Jim had mentioned that in the beginning of the conversation.
Well, the pedestrian scramble is a current project that's going to make the intersection downtown in front of the US Bank extremely pedestrian friendly. It's going to raise the level of the grade, and it's going to make a safe passageway for pedestrians. It's a very placemaking enhancing development for the downtown. I would like to talk a little bit about the dialogue back and forth about what you hope to happen and what the city is doing is fine, and I think you guys should continue to do that. But I am here to answer questions about the process. So if folks have a question about the process, please ask me. The several questions in Andrea's presentation, I really appreciate that presentation, Andrea. Those are several of the questions, many of the questions that the consultant has been hired to address. I think part of the idea, part of I think what is very healthy about tonight's conversation is you're raising some of the complexities associated with making a decision about Park Lane. Safety, fire trucks, availability, the store that needs access and doesn't have it. It's just making the point of how, in order to make a decision like this, it's very helpful to have professionals. This consultant group we found through a process that to be an exceptional group to help answer those questions. And the idea of counting votes is not what the consultant was hired to do. I want to be clear about that, I certainly am only speaking from the city's perspective. I don't begrudge anybody their own opinion, but the consultant was not hired to count votes. I want to be clear about that. Consultant was hired to do expert research and give insight to answer the complexities, to answer to the several complexities associated with the decision. And the timeline is a report back to the council in May. What the council does and when they decide is up to the council. But what we've been doing through this process is very transparently and very deliberatively, I would say, trying to answer the complexities that have been raised tonight. And I appreciate folks raising those complexities. They exist. They have to be addressed before a decision like this is made. And that's the city's initiative. And that's principally why we are investing so much time in meetings like this and others. And we had several days. We want to get folks in front of the consultants so that they can hear the issues that you have and address the complexities. In the end, the value of the decision will be based on how much time and effort we take to address these underlying concerns. And part of the task is to find other places that are like Kirkland. I appreciate folks saying, well, we're not like this part of the world, or this is a differentiating. I think someone said, don't compare us to the UW street. I appreciate that. Yeah, Andrea. So let's find out where we can be compared to, and let's find out, comparing apples to apples, what were the causes of success or the causes of failure, so that we can collectively, all of us, give the council the best information that they can in order to make this decision to benefit our community. And Park Lane in our downtown is a beautiful area, and it is a differentiating area. Not many cities have a park lane or a downtown the way Kirkland does, next to the lake and with walking distance to Peter Kirk Field and the KPC and Kirkland Urban. It's a magical area. And I think what the council is trying to do is make sure that the area realizes its potential. And whatever that is an open question. But from the staff's perspective, we need help in order to answer these complexities. And that's why MIG was hired.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that summary there. There's obviously a lot of comments in the chat. There's also links and everything else. So given that we are a little bit pushing our time limit here, I think we're just going to end this this session at this point. Maybe at a future date, we can have a longer forum or something like that. Appreciate all the presenters and everybody who made comments today on the future of Park Lane. Obviously, passion from all the residents and the business owners about what's going to happen in this very critical space. So once again, thank you very much. And what I will do is I will take all the links and the information from the chat, and I will publish that on our website probably tomorrow, or on our Facebook page as well.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody.
Alex, can I say one last thing? If people are interested in learning more about the work of the Downtown Kirkland Alliance, please, if you, Alex, in anything that you send out, you can certainly provide email access for that, and we can certainly provide a lot of the materials that we prepared from the public record. So as well.
That'd be great. Yep, absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So next up, we have George Dugdale from Kirkland Finance and Admin Office. So many of us seem not to be clear on how property taxes and applied values, why they're not aligned necessarily. So George is going to take us through the city budgeting process and how appraised value of one's home relates to the property taxes that we pay. Thank you for waiting. The floor is yours, George.
It was an interesting conversation. Thank you. Okay, let me just bring up my slideshow here. Okay. Okay, can everybody see the?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, perfect. So Thank you, Alex. And hi, everyone. I'm George Dugdale, the Financial Planning Manager for Kirkland. So I'm the manager of the team that manages the city's budget and capital improvement program as well. And we have property taxes are something that we get quite a lot of questions about, and it's quite a kind of complex system. And Alex has seen bits of this presentation before at the Parks Funding Exploratory Committee meetings, which I think were mentioned earlier. So I'm going to try and give you a pretty quick run through of property taxes in Washington and in Kirkland specifically, and then look at what's happened in 2023 in particular, because I know that's of interest to people. Whoa. Okay, so as I said, just quick look at property taxes in Washington. Talk a bit about, in terms of the city's budget, where property taxes go, what they fund, and then get into some of the kind of more detailed pieces, exceptions to the limits, and then at the end, try and tie it together with differences from district to individual level property taxes. So Washington state system is unique, or almost unique, in the US, in that it's a budget-based property tax, and limits are set on the aggregate basis. So what this means is that many people have heard, I think, of the 1% limit on property taxes in Washington, that property taxes can only increase by 1% each year. And that limit applies to each taxing jurisdiction in aggregate. And this, I think, makes it complicated to calculate, but it also brings in a lot of confusion, because this is where people see great differences between that 1% and their own property tax bills. It's based on a uniform levy rate and a property's assessed valuation. So uniform levy rate is just that everybody within the jurisdiction pays the same rate. And then cities and other taxing districts, like I said, establish the total dollar amount and revenue for the upcoming year. Once that amount is set, and what happens is the county sends us in about September or October, they send us a worksheet that basically says your estimated assessed valuation for the next year is this, your property taxes in the current year are this, do you want to take the 1% increase, yes or no? We then write back to them and say yes, and council passes an ordinance to that effect. The King County Assessor's Office then does the kind of calculation of Kirkland and all the other taxing jurisdictions to work out what that means for the rate for each individual property owner. And so, like I say, the county assessor calculates the total levy amount for each agency and the rate that the individual property owner pays. So the formula dictates the maximum allowable levy. And so, as I said, it's the current year's regular levy amount times the levy limit factor, which is either 1%, or if inflation is particularly low, the implicit price deflator is what they use for inflation, then it would be less than 1%. And that has come up in some of the very low inflation years we saw before the pandemic. In the current year, the implicit price deflator was 6.5% or close enough to. And so it was way above the 1%. And so that caps increases at 1%. And then we also get an allowance for new construction. So any new buildings, or there's a limit that the assessor has in terms of substantial alterations that make it new construction. The levy from those buildings and those properties is just added on top of the 1%. In recent years, Kirkland has averaged about 1.5% of our total levy from those new constructions. And then prior year levy corrections, these are generally very, very small, but it's corrections to what the assessor had given us in the previous year. So those three things together are our maximum allowable regular levy. And every year in about November, council passes an ordinance that sets our preliminary property tax, which is our maximum allowable regular levy amount for the next year. So in 2023, for a property in Kirkland, about 11, just under 12% of property taxes from each property owner will be going to the city of Kirkland. Most property taxes go in some form to schools. So you can see there about 30% of the levy is Lake Washington School District, and then a further 31% goes to the state school system, either through the state school fund or through the McCleary decision from 2020. So about 60% of property taxes in total from a Kirkland resident will be going to the school system. And then you also have King County, which is a significant contributor. And then you see some of the other kind of smaller districts, the Library District, Sound Transit, the Port of Seattle, and others. So at the city, the property taxes are now our second. They go back and forth between sales tax and property taxes for what's our largest revenue source in the general fund. But those two are by far our biggest revenue sources. And sales tax is much more volatile. When the economy is bad, sales tax declines, but it also sees much quicker growth. Our property tax levy, due to the 1%, is much easier to track and much easier to predict in future years. And that's looking just at the general fund. We do also have property tax that goes into separate funds for specific purposes. The 2012 Parks and Streets levy in Kirkland, that money goes into the street fund and a parks fund. The 2020 fire and EMS levy, that funding does go into the general fund because our fire department is part of the general fund, but that funding is used specifically for fire. So inside the general fund, about half of our expenses are for public safety, for police, fire, and a very small amount for the municipal court. But the general fund also has most of our parks department, has human services, part of our public works department, as well as a lot of the support services like finance and HR, city manager's office, and others. So property taxes really kind of generate a large portion of our general fund, kind of most flexible resources. So there are, as I said, exceptions to the 1% increase. So in every taxing jurisdiction, they are capped by the 1%. But there are various forms of voted exceptions to the property tax limit. So the most common is the basic levy lid lift, which is a single year levy lid lift. And so a good example would be the 2020 Kirkland Fire and EMS levy. So if one of those is on the ballot, it basically says we would increase the rate by this much to generate this much for these services. And there are, I would say, maybe not every year, but it's very common to have levy lid lifts on the ballot. You can also get multi-year levy lid lifts. I was talking to Michael Olson, our finance director, earlier, and neither of us could, off the top of our heads, think of one of these. They do exist. I think our bond council told us of one in Bainbridge Island or somewhere, but they are essentially like levy lid lifts, but they happen over multiple years. So you say, we are going to increase the rate by this much next year and this much the year after that, and again the year after that. And it's used for sometimes staggering increases or new services, but it's obviously harder for people to vote for because they're increasing property taxes above that 1% for multiple years. You also get bond measures. School districts have a lot of bond measures, but the cities have one in 2002. Our Kirkland Parks ballot measure in 2002 had a bond and a operating component. And that is when you raise a specific amount of money to pay the debt service for a capital program. So in 2002, there were specific parks that were going to be remodeled, and the debt on that debt issuance was paid specifically by property tax. And then finally, there are other you can form other districts, other types of government. So the most common is probably a Metropolitan Parks District. And people may remember there was an unsuccessful ballot measure in 2015 in Kirkland that would have formed a Metropolitan Parks District. But you also get fire districts and library districts, and those all come with their own property tax authority. And in the first year would be a new addition to the property tax roll. So there are exceptions above the 1%, and those are the most common. Okay, so I've been through things that people may know some of and kind of may have been new and was pretty high level. So if there's questions at the end on some of those pieces, I'm happy to go back. But I think what is of most interest, at least what we often get questions about, is how that 1% limit does or doesn't apply to kind of an individual's property taxes. So something we've heard a lot this year in particular is, my property taxes have gone up 15–20% in this year. So how does that interact with the 1% levy? So there are three there are three key factors that impact this. The first is voted levies, as I just went through. So if any voted levy would be in excess of that 1%, and there were some voted levies for Kirkland voters last year that I have a slide on in a second. The second is change in assessed valuation relative to other communities within a jurisdiction. So if I go back a couple of slides, about 15% of property taxes in Kirkland go to King County. King County is obviously bigger than just Kirkland. And so if assessed valuations in Kirkland rise quicker than they do in other parts of the county, then Kirkland voters will be, or Kirkland residents rather, will be paying a higher percentage of the property taxes than they were the year before. And that would see their property taxes increase by more than 1%. And that also applies to state schools and to Lake Washington School District. Any of these jurisdictions which are beyond the city of Kirkland's boundaries, which is basically all of them apart from the city. So that's the second piece. The third piece is the change in your assessed valuation relative to other properties within that jurisdiction. So this, maybe I could have worded that slightly better, but an example here would be residential versus commercial property in Kirkland. So this is something that we have seen long-term in the county, and I think across the state, is that residential property prices have risen much more uniformly and much more consistently than commercial property prices. And so if you have a year with large residential property increases, but much smaller commercial property increases or even decreases in commercial properties, you will see increases in the property taxes that go to the residents and decreases potentially in the taxes that went to commercial properties, because the residents would be eating up or would be responsible for a bigger slice of the pie. So as I said, I have a slide on voted levies in 2022. So there were 4 levies last year, and I pulled this from the county's website. So the King County Conservation Futures, and then 3 separate Lake Washington School District levies, which would have applied to voters in Kirkland. So all 4 of those would have been added to the rolls for either the county or the school district in excess of their 1% increase for 2023. The second piece I talked about was how assessed values vary in one community versus another. So I looked, and the county has just released their 2023 data by community in most instances. And so I took the top 6 communities in terms of and ranked them by the percentage change as their assessed valuation. And then that's the countywide average. And then this is the lowest 6. There's obviously a lot of communities in between these two. But you can see that Kirkland and a lot of other East Side communities saw percentage increases in assessed valuation of above 40% or higher. So I can tell you in Kirkland, ours went from something like 36 trillion or 33 trillion to 48 trillion between 2022 and 2023. And the way the county, and I don't want to get too far outside my responsibilities here, but the way the county assesses it is they do on the ground, assessments of people's property. I think once every 5 years is what they do. They kind of have walk around and actually look at houses and other, houses, condos, everything. And then in those intervening years, they use the average in either increases in sales or the average in increases in of like kind of neighborhoods around you. And so there was a huge increase in the property market, and then a corresponding huge increase on the East Side in particular in assessed valuation percentage change between 2022 and 2023. And you can see much smaller increases in places outside, other than the East Side. Seattle was the lowest of all the communities in King County, but there were also more moderate gains in some of the communities in South King County. So what this means is that for county-wide levies, a higher portion of those levies is being paid for by East Side property owners. And then the final one is this residential versus commercial changes. So the full assessor report on commercial zones is not yet available. I couldn't find it on their website earlier. So instead, you can look up on, if you go to the King County Assessor's website, they have a parcel viewer, they call it, and you can click on individual properties and see the changes in assessed valuation. And so I looked at some commercial properties in Kirkland, and some of the small to mid-size did see pretty good increases in assessed valuation, But I noticed smaller increases in large commercial parcels. One of the big parcels at the village at Totem Lake saw no increase, and I saw around a 7% increase at one of the parcels at Kirkland Urban. So what this means is that within Kirkland and also within the countywide levies, the residential properties are making up a higher slice of the total levy. And as I put there, the 4 residential parcels that we used as an example to make the final slide, they were all valued around $1 million, and all of them saw assessed valuation increases of around 40%. So this final slide, this isn't of any one particular property. This is an average of 4. We basically found 4 residential properties in Kirkland with assessed valuations around $1 million. And you can see these are all the different taxing districts to which property taxes go. This was the 2022 tax. This is the 2023 tax. And this is the percentage increase from 22 to 23. So you can see the highest increase is at Lake Washington School District, where there were those 3 levies. And so that's primarily what's driving that large increase. For the county, King County is the next largest. For the county, there was a levy that got added to the roll, so that increased it beyond the 1%. But this is also being driven by the relative price increases in Kirkland on the east side versus some of the other places in King County. You can see Port of Seattle, Sound Transit, and the flood control zone district all coming in just under 20%. They are identical jurisdictions with with identical boundaries, and none of them had any levy lid lifts or anything else that affected the property. And you can see Kirkland was the lowest percentage increase, but even that for these properties was far above the 1%. And that's primarily due to the relative increase of residential properties versus commercial properties. So that's what's driving those increases there. So overall, these properties were seeing about a 20% increase in their property taxes. And I think that's not uncommon experience for residents and homeowners in Kirkland between 2022 and 2023. So that is all my slides. I know we went quickly through that, but if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So George, just a question here. So this is based on analysis of $1 million home, which is slightly higher than the sort of the median property value that you showed for Kirkland, right?
It's slightly higher than the 2022 median, but slightly lower actually than the 2023. I think I have it here. So it was 881 in 22 and 123 in 2023. And that is lower than if you were to go to, Zillow and look at random houses in Kirkland, they'd almost certainly be more than 881. But that includes condos, it includes all kind of residential parcels. And so there's a lot of either kind of unimproved parcels or very small condos and those things which kind of bring down the median value beyond just what a single family home might be in most of Kirkland.
So in your mind, then, this is pretty representative of most homeowners in terms of their percent increase, assuming there's no real difference between, let's say, this block versus that block, right?
Yeah, I think in a community like Kirkland, where there aren't those pronounced differences that there might be in, say, Seattle, or this is pretty standard for what, and we've actually had a few questions either through council members or kind of directly to us about people's property tax increases, and this 20% number does seem pretty representative for this year.
Okay. Okay, there is a question in the chat from Glenn. I own a home and a condo in Kirkland, and the change in taxes year to year are rarely close. I assume this is because the detailed evaluation every few years, George has mentioned, and is done in a different year for each. However, the difference is stark, usually 15–20%, and this has gone on for the 5 years I've owned both. Is this a flaw in the system?
I mean, I think I don't want to speak too much to how the county does their assessments, and it may be related to, like you said, I've definitely heard, and I live in Seattle and have experienced kind of big jumps in AV seemingly at odd times because they've done their walk around and kind of caught up with the neighborhood. And they know, and I'm not sure there's a way around this, but what tends to happen is county values lag like the market, because they're looking in 1 year for the next year. And then when they actually do their so sometimes they'll miss things, and then they'll actually catch up when they do their, their full on the ground analysis. I think having two different types of properties as well, a condo and a single family home, you're also subject to the relative change in those two types of property. So that's probably driving some of it as well.
Okay, any other questions at this point for George? Wow, you did an incredible job then, I think. Oh, wait, sorry. Here we got one more here from Dan. So how do you square 20% property tax increases when incomes aren't going up anywhere near that pace?
I mean, I think, and this is to the previous question about whether it's a flaw in the system. I think that from the city's perspective, we are getting 1% more property tax than we received last year. And so our kind of, our role each year is basically to say, do we want to take our 1%? And we have always, and most jurisdictions do always take that 1% because it's lower. As I said, inflation was closer to 6 to 7%. I think that where it gets kind of difficult is that because it's at the aggregate level, it has all these impacts below the surface that you're describing, like 20% increases in Kirkland, and people's incomes weren't going up by 20%. And there's lots of people in Kirkland on fixed incomes. And, just because Kirkland or Redmond may be a wealthy community doesn't mean that everybody's wealthy. And I think having this aggregate-based system is what drives that. And it means because everybody's paying the same rate, that's how they kind of calculate it. And so you end up with the intent, I think, of the 1% is that people would see 1% increases. And that's not what happens because of the, because of the 1% aggregate limit.
So one thing you mentioned, or I saw on a slide earlier, so you talked about inflation, sorry, the 1% plus inflation. So that's only at the King County level? It doesn't apply to the city, right?
No, it's not one, it's just 1%. It's 1% or inflation, whichever is lower. And so
whichever is lower.
King County applies to everybody. So I think there was a year, maybe 2020 into 2021, where inflation was actually lower than 1%. And so in a year like that, the city would only be able to take the 0.89 or whatever inflation really was.
I got it. Okay. So Jean asks, can we someday have a limit on the amount of property values that property values can increase?
That is what, there are other states that do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think California has a system where yours is set at the year you buy it at. And they all create different, costs and benefits for residents and for local governments. But there are states that do that, definitely.
Okay. I think this is more of a comment from Glenn. We need to get a King County property tax person in a meeting to answer many of these questions. They are beyond the city's purview, right? So I think that makes sense because, we're just such a small slice of the overall pie. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you very much for that concise but incredibly complicated topic. I think you went over that very well.
And I'm happy to share my slides if that would be helpful as well. So.
Okay, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you, George. Okay. Okay. So next up is so last meeting I gave an update on the PFEC, the Parks Funding and Exploratory Committee, but there might be some of those that have missed it. So I'm just going to provide a quick summary of the background and the outcomes now that the committee has wrapped its meetings for now. Let's see, here we go. So the PFEC was, the PROS plan, which is the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan, was updated last year. And it kind of acted as a vision document for what Kirkland citizens would like from the parks. There were so many projects identified that to complete them all, given the current budget constraints, would take, they estimated, like decades, 50 years or something like that. So the idea of creating this ballot measure to accelerate some of these projects was the impetus of creating the PFEC. So here is a table of, here's a table showing that basically Kirkland is kind of lacking some of these indoor facilities relative to a city given our population, right? So, the average inventory of these same size cities, 2.3 for a rec center, we currently have 0 as an example. So they've definitely identified a need within our city. So at the end of the day, there was really no consensus amongst members for a definitive package for the ballot measure. Rather, there were general recommendations for at least what we see here: 1 community rec aquatic facility, as well as sort of top 5 other park elements. So that would be the ones in consideration would be located at the Houghton Park and Ride. So there's a large and a sort of a medium-sized pool and rec center. The other location potentially would be the North Kirkland Community Center up in Juanita, which is about 7,400 square feet, and that's kind of a smaller. It would have a pool and maybe some gym and some other flexible spaces. So once again, the recommendation is to include at least one of these in the ballot measure, as well as these other elements. So more restrooms, year-round restrooms, new ones, as well as some that get winterized to, I guess, accelerate the purchase of some of the segments for the Green Loop Trail over in Finn Hill and Juanita, to build new sports courts, pickleball, basketball, tennis courts, etc. And these locations aren't fully determined yet. To number 4 is the enhanced recreation programs for youth and teens. That's sort of the K-Tub building there, to run programs out of there. There were some programs that run for teens specifically last year, but those were COVID specific funds, and those have run out. So the idea was to maybe incorporate that as well. And number 5 is to increase lifeguards at beaches, as well as the Water Safe program. So next steps will be the city will be conducting a survey, probably, I believe it's going to go out next month for the residents on these facilities, as well as the other elements. So there are 22 potential elements that were in the pros plan. These were the top 5 that PFEC had identified, but I think they're just going to go out and just to get a wider sense across the residents of what's important to them, and whether or not this is something that you would consider paying for in sort of this this higher tax environment this year. All right, so I think the recommendations in a final report then go to City Council in May, where they have a decision to make before they can create the ballot measure on to potentially the November elections. So once the links for the survey and any other information are available, I'm definitely going to post those onto our website. Okay, great. Any questions? Okay. Well, once again, if you have any questions or comments based on anything we've heard here, feel free just to send an email to contact@mossbay.org. We'd be happy to get back to you and find some additional resources. Just a couple announcements here. Neighborhood Happy Hour is the next one is going to be April 10th. Thanks to everyone who turned up for our last meeting. The next neighborhood meeting is going to be May 8th. And I'm just going to open the floor now to see if there are any other general community announcements anybody would like to make at this time.
Alex.
Yes.
I can make a short presentation on the safety program if you'd like me to.
Oh, absolutely, Don. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just pick up where we left off at our last meeting and do a very short timeline here. This is not going to take very long. Since our last meeting, I had a neighborhood conference with the city planners, the neighborhood people, the engineers, and so forth. They give you feedback on your proposals, our our neighborhood safety program proposals. And so we got feedback. Both of our projects got good feedback. But one thing that surprised me quite a bit is that the projected cost of our projects, and we had the exact same project in last cycle, which was 2021 or 2020, I guess it was. And the price, the estimated price was $115,000 for rapid flashing beacons at State Street and 2nd Avenue South. This time they projected the cost to be $240,000. So inflation run wild there. I don't really know why. It seems to go beyond supply chain issues. So I don't really get, they must have figured out a different way of scoring it. So that made the projects very expensive. I don't know how that's going to affect it. They say they take that into effect, and so that I think we still have a good chance of getting our projects approved. But that was one thing that really surprised me. So then the next thing that happened is we had our neighborhood meetup at Side Hustle that Alex arranged, and also Katya Allen, I think, was a main cog in that wheel. And then we were able to get I met an official, I guess you would say, of St. John's Church, and then we got a letter supporting our RFB at State Street and 2nd Avenue South that we were able to submit along with our application. So both of our applications had supporting letters from organizations that were affected by them, Ages Living and St. John's Church and Preschool. They have a school there too. So that would help our application quite a bit. So then we actually put in our applications on February 14th. So we filled out our application form and actually formally applied to the city. And then on March 2nd, we had a meeting with all the other neighborhood safety program coordinators like myself. So there was about, I think about 12 of us there, and we all presented our projects and on the screen if we wanted to, or we just verbally presented them. And and so yeah, so then after we saw all the other neighborhoods present their programs, we had to score all the programs. I'll actually share my screen for just a second here. I hope this is going to work. Let's see how that works. Okay, yeah, here. All right, so this, I assume you can see that.
Yep, we're good.
So this is the scoring sheet, and you can see the criteria on the left here. Neighborhood benefit support, community support, and neighborhood community projects. So all the neighborhoods scored all the other neighborhoods projects, and then we all submitted this on last Friday, I think it was March 10th. So that's part of the overall scoring of how the projects will be selected. And you can see how the scoring works out there. And this is the one I made out, and ours come down here. It was 15 altogether, so it was quite a job to fill all this out and look them all over. And scoring it is kind of difficult. So I came up with, I hope, an objective way of doing it. And everybody else had to do the same thing. So all of them have been scored now. So I would be able to report tonight how we did in the sweepstakes here, except that the final meeting is Wednesday, 2 days from today. So that's when we will find out how our project scored, and I guess we'll find out if our project will be selected to go forward. So that is the presentation.
Hey, that's great, fantastic news that it's actually going to come to fruition at some point this year. Just curious, what was the ones that you scored? Which was the highest one?
Well, I scored ours the highest.
Okay, other than ours.
Well, let me see. I'll bring it back on my screen here.
Just trying to figure out what would be the biggest competition for our projects
Well,
in your mind.
this is strictly on my own scoring.
Yeah.
So, one was a connection on 80th Street. It's up near between Lake Washington High School and I think Rose Hill Junior High. There's a section of sidewalk missing there where a fairly simple fix would make a great safety improvement. So I scored that one pretty high. And then Waverly Way between Market Street and Waverly Beach Park there, that long stretch of Waverly Way, which can be kind of a freeway there. People really get moving. And there's no crosswalks the whole way. So there was one proposal for a crosswalk at Waverly Way in Second. It's near Heritage, it's actually at Heritage Park, the far end of Heritage Park across Waverly Way. So that one was another one that was a lot of need for it. And one of the categories, one of the scoring criteria is bang for the buck kind of thing. And that's good. The crosswalks themselves are cheap, especially compared with rapid flashing beacons. And so that's how it went. That one, Finn Hill Middle School, crosswalk there. That is that was a simple one too, but it's a school impacted and another bang for the buck one. All they had to do was really fix up a lane that was where people were parking where they shouldn't have, paint the curbs red and things like that. So, that's it. There wasn't really any that were really, I wouldn't say any better than ours. I mean, ours were. There was one other one where rapid flashing beacon where the price was even higher than ours because we were the 3-post one, so 300,000 for that one. And I questioned the number of people. That's another thing that I took into account was how many people benefit from this project. And even though that one was near a library, I just didn't, and enough traffic on the street was high, but they're not the ones that are going to benefit from the rapid flashing beacon. So I didn't get the impression that really a lot of people were going to benefit from that. So those are things that come into play.
Got it. Okay. So once you have final results or next steps or whatever, we'll just I'll push that out to everybody and publish that on our website.
Okay. Yeah. We wish us luck for Wednesday night.
Great. Thanks so much, Don, for all your work there. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So once again, these are the dates. April 10th is our next happy hour. Details will come out via email and on our website. And our next meeting is May 8th. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. It's a bit longer today, but we've had a lot of interesting conversations. All right. Thank you. See you.